why the West got rich. The most important one, the one that you hear all the time, is they got rich because they stole it. I was listening to Neil Young on my iPad coming over here. There's a Canadian. I was listening to Neil Young, and he has the Cortez the Killer. They came across the waterman, Cortez. That's what he's referring to, Cortez coming over and taking gold. So by that theory, the West got rich because they had this military advantage, and they went over and they stole. Now, it's a good theory, and there's probably something to it. But here's the problem with the theory. Well, there's a couple of full theory problems with the theory. The first place, as I note here, there's kind of a moral kind of obtuseness that goes along with this theory. And that is to say that Europeans bad, non-Europeans good. Now, the problem with that is they stole, the non-Europeans were really imperialists among themselves. It's not like they were like these peaceful little people living in the in the Emerald Forest. You ever seen that movie? One of my favorite movies. In the Emerald Forest, who never attacked anybody else. They were always trying to take their neighbor's stuff and people. So the question isn't why the Europeans went and stole from them. It's why they didn't come and steal from the Europeans. If you read Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steel, check out, my son is reading in grade 7. You can definitely, open a bottle of scotch, sit down and read it in an afternoon. You might not get the end as much as you do the beginning, I guess. Or if you don't like scotch, just run a bath and read the book. It asks a really interesting question. Why does the West develop? And he has his own set of answers. I mean, it really does get you back to that question, what are the origins of the West's technological superiority? Let's go back for 1 second. I mean, it can't just be that the West, portions of the West were militarily superior and then conquered the rest of the world. After all, which portions of the West were militarily superior first? Spain. Even before England. And it's not that Spain became the most powerful country in the history of the world. It wasn't enough just to steal it. You had to be able to sustain development. Spain became one of the poorest areas of Europe for a long time. So it wasn't simply a matter of going and getting goods. If stealing were enough to get you rich permanently, lots of places would be rich permanently. Other places are, other theorists argue, and Diamond is in this camp a little bit, but this is a kind of a geographic and natural determinism. That is, the West, the northwest part of Europe, it was always really cold. And then it started warming up. And this gave them a kind of a renewed technological advantage. But there's a problem with that theory. Warmth, climatic warmth were a precondition for economic development. The warm areas of the world would have been developed. And we sure wouldn't have settled on like this place, walking over here. Walking over here, I was renewed again in my wonder that anybody actually ever settled Canada. Why didn't they just keep on walking? 20 days south, you were in Virginia. I'll leave that alone. 10 degrees there today. Let's spread my more. So what was it about Northwest Europe that made it unique? And there we have Max Weber. And Weber pointed out, as many others had before him, that what made the northwest part of Europe unique was Protestantism. Protestantism. The rise and the spread of the Protestant Reformation that changed Christianity forever. And Weber was not the first to do this. Weber and other people had noticed this before, that this part of Europe was largely, mostly, almost completely Protestant. Other social theorists had done this before. In fact, they were responding to Marx. And I'll come back to that in a minute. So Weber publishes the one you're reading now as 2 long articles between in 1904 and 1905. You know, a little over a century ago. And he opens it with a statistical fact. Business leaders, owners of capital, as well as the higher grades of skilled labor, and even more the higher technically and commercially trained personnel of modern enterprises, are overwhelmingly Protestant. Points to a sociological fact. You don't need to write all that down. You own it. On Blackboard. It's not merely a contemporary fact, it's also a historical fact. He traces the association back. It can be shown that some of the earliest centers of capitalist development in the early part of the 16th century were strongly Protestant. Now, what is the explanation for this? What is the normal explanation? I realize you didn't think you were taking a class on religion. Too bad, tricked you. Well, the right explanation out there, and it's the one you normally hear, it's the one that will clearly come to mind first, is that Protestantism, it provides a break with the traditionalism of the Catholic religion. So it sloughs off traditions and religious institutions. The church is no longer as powerful. Protestantism, by this line of explanation, is the kind of easier religion. Less superstitious, less, kind of incense and wafers and wine and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to get into wafers and wine in a couple of minutes. Believe me, I have no dog in this hunt. You guys know that. I don't care one way or the other. I'm giving you a sociological explanation here. So here we have the kind of map of Protestant Europe, Catholic Europe, Orthodox Europe, and then areas east, Islam. Protestants in purple. And you see, as far as kind of sociological observations go, it's a darn good one. It's a pretty good one. It is the kind of map of where economic development happens first in Europe, in the kind of the lowlands. Does that work? Yeah, the lowlands, the Netherlands, up through Denmark, northern Germany, a bit of northern France, and that weird place with the bad food, bad weather, and the nobility that doesn't speak any foreign languages and only likes hunting and dogs. Anybody watch Downton Abbey last night? No, I didn't actually know it was taped. I had it on. My wife made me watch it. Again, I was absolutely shocked that these people ever had any economic development at all. Of course, they were the downwardly mobile nobility. You have to watch Downton Abbey if you really want to see. And they contrast the American relatives who are all entrepreneurial and are not bound by tradition. But this is the normal explanation for Protestantism, is that it's not bound by tradition the way that Catholicism is. But Weber points out that this analysis of Protestantism does not stand up to scrutiny. Weber says the traditional explanation for Protestantism is largely Marxist, and it's wrong. For one thing, see there you have, you guys like to know who the pictures are. There's Luther, and that's Calvin. Calvin was especially scary in that picture. For one thing, under the Reformation, there's no escape from the church. People who are Protestants still go to church. But for another thing, and here becomes the tricky part, the early Protestants were subject to a much higher degree of regulation of their ordinary life outside of the church. Remember, the thing about Catholicism is the rituals the part of Catholicism that's Catholicism really, is inside of the church. Everything is really inside of the church. The rest of your life, what you do outside of the church is less regulated. What's more, Protestantism, it adopts a pretty stringent attitude towards relaxation and enjoyment. And this is especially pronounced, not renounced. Well, enjoyment is renounced, right? True. Within Calvinism. Frivolity. I'm going to come back to this in more detail. So what we got to do, Faber tells us, is we need to look to the specific character beliefs of Protestant beliefs if we're to account for the connection between Protestantism and economic rationality. And as I said, Faber wasn't the first one to see this. It's usually just put through a Marxist lens. Protestantism, according to Marxists, is the ideological reflection of the economic changes in early capitalism. Here's the problem with that. And I know I'm going to repeat this on a subsequent slide, but it's probably pretty important that I say it up front. Protestantism comes before capitalism. Just like logic tells you, it's hard to imagine something caused by something that happened after it. Right? Protestantism comes after, capitalism comes after Protestantism, comes after the Reformation. That, at a minimum, should get you thinking about the Marxist explanation for Protestantism, that there's something fishy. That there's something fishy. Or at least, at a minimum, the lines of causality are complicated. Even if you don't want to reject Marx altogether, you want to say the lines of causality here are much more complicated. What's causing what? Okay. I want to go through that first point. Faber's an interesting guy because most of us think that when you're caught up with economic activity, you're kind of ignoring the spiritual world. You don't really, when you're involved in making money and buying and selling stuff and maximizing your economic benefit, you're not usually thinking about God. That's not usually on your mind first. It's not there front and center. And Faber says, you know, that's not always the case. That may be the case today, but that's not the world that other people lived in. And especially once you start looking at Protestantism, it didn't relax the control over the church of day-to-day activities, but intensifies it. In a way, it demands more rigorous activity. More rigorous thinking about your place in the world, the status of your soul. I mean, Catholicism, and we're going to talk about this a little bit in a couple minutes. You're Catholic. Okay, so let's talk about Catholicism for a couple of minutes. Again, no dog in the hunt. There must be a Catholic or two in this room. Okay. You're a Catholic. And then you go to church, and you go to confession. Can someone tell me here what happens in confession? You don't have to tell me what you confess. I just want to know what happens in confession. Yeah. So like, walk me through it, because a lot of people here don't know what it is. And I've never been to confession, so let me know. Okay, so you go in, it's really short, you go in, and the priest says, what have you done wrong? What are your sins? He asks you how long it's been since your last confession, sometimes. And then he tells you what your penance is, the things you have to do in order to what? In order to what? I missed that part. Clear your soul. In order to clear your soul, the status of your soul. Now this gets interesting here. Now, how does he do that? Yeah. And he does it, then God does it. But so you ask God and then he does it? I mean, or can you do it without asking him? Can you just do it on your own? Like, what's his status that's different from yours? That's what I want to get at here. He is kind of a God conduit. He's got that direct phone line, if you will. Right? He's got a more direct line. It's like there's an excellent Israeli joke about this, of course. Right? There's an excellent Israeli joke about just about everything. Right? That's the one where Obama's visiting. Netanyahu visits the White House, and Obama says he's got the 3 phones, and there's the blue phone, the red phone, and the white phone. And the blue phone, that's for calling you, Mr. President. The other one is to call the Russian leader, and the white phone, that's to call God. So that's a very expensive one. It's $1 billion every time we use it. We can't use it very much. And then Obama goes to the Middle East, goes to Mrs. Netanyahu, and there are 3 phones, the red phone, the white phone, and the blue phone. What is the one phone for? That's to call you, Mr. President. The other one, that's to call Mr. Putin. And the other one, the white phone, that's to call God. And he says, well, how can a little country like you afford to do something like that? Right? It's very expensive. He says, it's only 10 cents. He goes, what do you mean? He says, a local call. But this is for the priest, it's literally a local call. I'm not trying to make fun of his beliefs. But this is actually the status of your soul, if you're religious, is very, very important. And being in a state of grace is very important. For a Protestant, those opportunities to be in a state of grace are both much more frequent, that is always, and the key is no one can help you. The status of the Protestant minister is no different from the congress than the congregation. So in a way, the discipline is much more rigorous. This injects a religious factor into all spheres of life. There's clearly a relationship between Protestantism and modern capitalism, which cannot be wholly explained by seeing the former as the result of the latter. That's simply the historical point again. Every moment you are awake, everything you do, all your work, all your play, and every moment is an opportunity to achieve a state of grace. The process. He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake.
That's creepy.
That's all I'm saying. Okay, I'm going to skip that slide. These are some of my own reminding myself. Because some of you are saying, well, like, hasn't capitalism always been around? Isn't like buying and selling, isn't the world, it's not just like the natural condition, the natural state of things. Everybody's always buying and selling. We've always been capitalists. Donald Trump has been around forever. There's always been Donald Trump. Weber distinguishes modern capitalism from what he calls economic traditionalism. And he argues this. He says, and I will find this, it's in your reading, he says, a man does not by nature wish to earn more and more money, but simply as he lives, as he is accustomed to live, and earn as much as required to do so. It means you get as much as you need. Now you may think you need a lot, that's fine. But you spend. You don't rationally accumulate. If I pay you more and you're an economic traditionalist, you will work less. You'll work less because that's all you need. Why do people accumulate? And it's that initial impulse to accumulate. Not simply a few rich people who live high off the hog, but everybody. And the way you accumulate is by suppressing. You suppress your desire to spend. You suppress you suppress your desire. You act like a monk. You act like a monk. The monk suppresses certain desires. But they also suppress the desire to accumulate. They live poorly. They live a life of poverty. For Weber, traditionalism is by no means incompatible with greed for wealth. He says, absolute conscious ruthlessness in acquisition has often stood in direct and close connection with the strictest conformity tradition. Selfishness, Weber tells us, is to be found everywhere. That's not what makes capitalism. That's not capitalism. So, adventure capitalism, pirates, booty. Not in the sense of booty like MTV booty. But gathering stuff. That always has existed. That's not capitalism. Capitalism is found in the modern, rational, sober, systematic pursuit of accumulation, not in order to spend it, but it's experienced as an obligation, a duty. It's sober. It's not impassioned in that way that a pirate goes and takes other people's stuff. You've all known people like that. Or at least you haven't, you should. People who are quite wealthy, who still live quite modestly, get up and take cold showers early in the morning, head off to work at 6 a.m. Not because they need to, but because they feel it is their duty to do so. Weber identifies the principal features of the spirit of modern capitalism. Geist, the spirit of modern capitalism. Here's a nice quote. The acquisition of more and more money, combined with the strict avoidance of all spontaneous enjoyment, is thought of so purely as an end in itself that vis-a-vis the happiness of or utility to the particular individual, it appears as quite transcendental and wholly irrational. Man is dominated by acquisition as the purpose in life. Acquisition is no longer a means to the end of satisfying material needs. This reversal of what we might call the natural situation, completely senseless from an unprejudiced standpoint, is evidently a leading principle of capitalism, as it is foreign to all peoples not under capitalistic influence. You see this, getting more and more stuff than you need, not in order to enjoy it or even spend it. Then he says, I'm reading some nice little quotations here, so it might be hard for you to find. The dominant characteristic of modern capitalist economy is that it is rationalized on the basis of rigorous calculation, directed with foresight and caution toward the economic success which is sought, in sharp contrast to the hand-to-mouth existence of the peasant and to the privileged traditionalism of the guild craftsman and of the adventurer's capitalism oriented to the exploitation of political opportunities and irrational speculation. So this is what Weber is talking about. Weber tells us that there's a connection, what he calls an elective affinity. Wahlverwandtschaft is German, an elective affinity between early Protestantism and early capitalism. They're kind of like each other in their spirit. But he needs to figure out what that is. And Weber summarized all of this under what he called the calling. The calling. Your Beruf. What's really interesting about the word Beruf, in German, that's also the word for your profession. What you do, what your job's going to be, what your occupation is, what you do for the rest of your life. What you're called to do. This does not exist in Catholicism or in antiquity. For him, it summarizes, it serves to bring together the mundane affairs of everyday life with an all-embracing religious influence. The calling of the individual to fulfill his duty to God through the moral conduct of his day-to-day life. This is very Protestant. So what does this do? Weber looks at some interesting stuff here. He says, for the first thing it does is it propels Protestantism away from the ideal of monastic isolationism. So if you're a Catholic, the kind of ideal life, the ideal life is the life spent in solitude, in prayer, contemplation, outside of the world. Outside of the world. I should add, that's not true just for Catholicism. It's true for a lot of religions. I'm going to skip those next 2 points. Those are very fine points about Luther, who was the first Protestant. First Protestant, Lutheranism. After the Protestants, after Luther, the other Protestant sects, and Weber talks about them, especially the Calvinists, what he calls ascetic Protestantism. They do the really heavy lifting. They do, for him, they create this world we live in. That's why this is so powerful. Without them, we wouldn't have this world. So for Weber really focuses on Calvin. Calvin's Geneva. 3 main tenets. 1, they believe the universe is created for God's glory and only has meaning in relation to God's purpose. God does not exist for men, but men for God. That's number 1. Number 2, God's motives are unknowable. You can only know a small morsel of the divine truth. You are small, you are nothing, He is everything. And third, and this really makes people nuts, they believe in predestination, and you can't know whether you're predestined. Only a small number of people are chosen to receive eternal grace. Let's be clear about what the stakes are here, folks. We're talking about when you die, do you go to the good place or the bad place forever? The bad place is really bad. right?